With titles such as Half Life, Left 4 Dead, Dota, Portal and Team Fortress, it's safe to say that Valve has become a titan within the gaming industry. Their games have become monumental and have pushed the bar for what PC games should be. But on top of that, Valve have also become a company that has elevated the way we acquire and play video games on PC through their Steam store, which has now become a necessity when it comes to purchasing games. I mean, look at the loyalty people have to it when someone announces they are going to Epic Games instead of Steam. But how did Valve get to the level they are today? What made them this titan of a studio that has become a recognizable brand today? Well, in this video I will take you through the complete history of the company, looking at their games, their high points and their low points, and bring us up to their present release of Half Life Alyx in 2020. So welcome to WiseFish, and this is the history of Valve. Valve Software all started on the 24th of August 1996 and was formed by two long-serving Microsoft workers, Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington. Both of these guys were key developers, with Gabe himself stating that he was the producer of the first three releases of Windows. In the mid-90s, one of Microsoft workers, Michael Abrash, who is now a chief scientist of Ocular VR, left the company to join id Software to work on their latest upcoming game, Quake, which later released in 1996. Both Gabe and Harrington felt inspired by this move and followed him, creating Valve Software, hoping to be the next big thing in the gaming industry. The name Valve was created by the two, and its tagline was meant to fit in nicely into what the company name meant. The tagline was, "Open your minds, open your eyes." Valve was a small company at the start with just 28 people who began working on their first title. After getting permission to use the Quake engine licensed by id Software, Valve began working on their first title, the well-known Half-Life. Valve wanted to make this a horror-themed 3D action game that used the same style of combat that was seen in Quake, whilst obviously making it their own. Alongside Half-Life's development, Valve also tried to work on another title which was to emphasize exploration, have an intricate storyline, and also have combat involving psionic powers. The game was to be called Prospero. The game went under a lot of changes throughout the development cycle, with the character going through many different design choices, but in the end, the idea was scrapped and the team focused back onto Half-Life. However, still to this date, one developer, Greg Kuma, still states that he wants to make the game. And in the 2020 Reddit AMA about Half Life Alyx, one question was asked, which was, when will Prospero be released? The team's response was, Greg still talks about it daily. We just nod and pretend we're listening. That's the end of that, I guess. In 1997, Half-Life officially announced itself at the E3 convention through this trailer. God, you gotta love the classic music from the early video game trailers. Although this trailer is pretty awful to today's standards, at the time Half-Life won over audiences as they praised its animation system and its artificial intelligence. Obviously it's very dated now, but honestly at the time this game was revolutionary. Half-Life finally released to PCs on the 19th of November 1998 in North America, the 27th of November 1998 in Europe, and the 14th of July 2000 in Japan. It also went to finally release on the PlayStation 2 in 2001 and eventually Linux and Mac OS X in 2013. Jesus, Apple fans must have thought that there was a gaming revolution in 2013 when this finally came out. With Half-Life's release, Valve also had a few logos to go with their name. Obviously the recognizable name with the small E, I still really don't know what that small E means, but alongside that, two photos. The first shows a guy with a valve in his eye, and the second is a bald man's head with a valve on the back. These were labelled simply as the Valve guys. The meaning behind the images were to reference their tagline. The valve in the head was the open your mind reference, and the one in the eye was the open your eyes reference. Both these logos have now become iconic for their games and haven't really changed over the years, apart from the bald guy turning his head in Valve's later games. It'll be interesting to see if they still have them or if they've changed them at all for Half-Life Alyx's release. A year after this release, a Quake mod had been made, which at first was just a multiplayer element to the game involving different roles. Valve eventually reached out to those modders and employed them to make it as a mod for Half-Life. That game became known as Team Fortress and was released worldwide on the 7th of April 1999. Obviously the game wasn't as big as Half-Life, but it did help create a monumental and iconic game for Valve going forward. In 1999, Valve also went on to collaborate with the recently formed studio Gearbox Software and went on to create Half-Life's first expansion titled Opposing Force, which was released on the 19th of November 1999 in North America, 23rd of November 1999 in Europe, and July 14th, 2000 in Japan. Basically, Japan got the final edition of Half-Life with all its expansions. The game was focused on the events of Black Mesa, but this time putting you in the shoes of the invading force taking over the place. This was Gearbox's first game, and it certainly helped them to become the big name that they are today under the guidance of, oh God, this man. Mods were a staple for the gaming industry back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, especially when it came to first-person shooters. Once again, after it was first a mod for Half-Life, Valve reached out to the modders and hired them to make the fully fledged game Counter-Strike, which was released to the world on the 9th of November 2000. I mean, it's pretty safe to say that this game has never had a bad point in terms of player count and continues to sell out stadiums and bring players in 20 years after its release, and all thanks to its graphical upgrades and new mechanics being added later on. Obviously, new versions of the game have been released since, like Counter-Strike Neo, Condition Zero, Source, Online, Global Offensive, and other ones, but the foundations for this game were made back then, and it's just been a monumental and iconic game that really boosted the Valve brand. I just wanted to get that out there because there are so many Counter-Strike games that we would be here forever if we covered every different one and what they all did differently from the last. Once again in 2000, another mod was made for Half-Life and was developed into a game themed around Tron. The game was called Ricochet and was, well, I mean, look at this gameplay, it's mad. It's a combination of a tennis-style game with platforming elements. Honestly, it looks like something you'd see in an indie VR game. In 2020, in that same Reddit AMA, one user asked, when is Ricochet 2 coming out? Valve's response? Greg still talks about it daily. We just nod and pretend we're listening. Poor old Greg. Still stuck in his good old days. In 2001, Half-Life's final expansion is released, one of my personal favourites, Half-Life Blueshift. Another side story where you now follow the beloved police officer of Black Mesa, Barney. The game was once again a collaboration with Valve and Gearbox Studios, and once again helped boost Half-Life's sales and create awareness for Gearbox as a developer. Following that release, Valve went down a more classical route. Maybe they were influenced by the recent announcement of Call of Duty or previous titles like Medal of Honor Allied Assault, but regardless, Valve went on to release Day of Defeat, which was once again another Half-Life mod, which got noticed by Valve and released worldwide in May 2003. In the 2020 Reddit AMA, one Reddit, no, I'm just joking, but they didn't ask any questions. But sadly, Day of Defeat didn't lead to any other games going forward. But it was just nice to see how many different games came out of the Half-Life base game. It shows the importance of mods, doesn't it? And just how communities can really add to the overall gaming industry and gaming experience. Isn't that right, Bethesda? Activision Blizzard. You bastard. During this time, however, Valve began working on something a little different. At first, this was meant to take place where developers could update their games through one specific slot, but later turned into the largest digital game distribution platform in the world. That was Steam, which released on the 12th of September 2003. However, Steam was not a big hit with fans of Valve, as it required online authentication and also felt like they were trying to monopolize on the PC gaming market. It sounds very similar to the criticisms of a new distribution platform. But regardless, Steam eventually became a hit because of its vast store later on down the line and the fact that distributors could update their games through this platform, add extra things to their game, and just have it all located on one specific platform. It also cut down on making physical copies, which, like it or hate it, cut down on the cost of distribution for the games. Just before Steam's release, Valve attended the 2003 E3 event, getting ready to show off their new products to tons of fans. They had previously attended 2002's E3, but eventually cancelled their presentation for some reason. The 2003 E3, Valve showed off their latest project, one that really blew fans away.
We've been rather busy in your absence, Mr. Freeman.
Half-Life 2 had been officially announced, and it was clear to see that Valve had spent a lot of time working on their latest animations and their artificial intelligence through their latest engine called the Source engine, developed by Valve themselves. A gameplay demo was released during this event, and it was said that a lot of fans of Half-Life were absolutely blown away by how smooth the movement and combat system was, how incredible the physics engine was, and just the overall look of the game. It was pretty clear that this was one of the biggest games of E3, and with recent releases having been out in the past few years, like Halo Combat Evolved, I think it was safe to say that Half-Life 2 was going to raise the bar for the FPS genre once again. On the 16th of November 2004, Half-Life 2 was officially released to Steam, making this Steam's first exclusive game, somewhat forcing fans to have that software on their computers. The game was a massive hit. Although these figures are small compared to now, Half-Life 2 went on to sell over 600,000 copies and made over $34 million by 2006 in America alone. It also became the country's 17th best-selling PC game between the years 2000 and 2006. On top of that, the game also went on to win 35 Game of the Year awards, making it one of the best games out there. Half-Life 2 really pushed the boundaries thanks to its graphics, its physics engine, and its animations. Although they are somewhat dated now, I still feel like they look and work amazingly 16 years on. And although we have motion capture and all that, I personally believe that Half-Life 2 was the game that pushed the industry into a new technological age. I mean, let's be honest, what other game played around with guns like the gravity gun? I mean, personally, I can't think of any other game that did things like this back in the early 2000s. 1 month after the release of Half-Life 2, a multiplayer element was added to the game, which was, it was fine. I never really played it personally, but there you go, it was there. Valve continued to focus on Half-Life 2 as it was their flagship series. A year after the release of Half-Life 2, Valve released a sort of DLC called Half-Life 2 Lost Coast. The idea behind this DLC was to add to the already large level Lost Coast, but this time allow the player to explore it more and also show off the true capabilities of the Source engine, displaying high dynamic range rendering and new lighting. Valve really had become the developers who wanted to play around with new technology and push the boat out in terms of graphical capabilities. 1 year later, Valve released their first expansion for Half-Life 2, simply titled Episode 1, which followed the journey of Gordon Freeman and Alyx as they tried to escape City 17 after the events of the base game. The expansion also introduced several new graphical effects such as new lighting features and brand new facial animations, once again pushing the limits of their new Source engine. Episode 1 was once again a hit, and just added to the vast world of Half-Life, allowing players to immerse themselves more into the story that had been amazingly executed in the base game. Valve didn't stop there, and in November 2006 went on to release the experimental game titled Garry's Mod, which was developed by Facepunch Studios. Garry's Mod allowed players to experiment in game modes, create maps, create videos, and just mess about with some iconic characters. It was once again another way to experiment in the capabilities of the Source engine and what you could do with the physics of the game. It's amazingly summed up by Valve's description on the Steam store that states, "There aren't any predefined aims or goals, we give you the tools and leave you to play." Sums it up nicely. In 2007, Valve really went to town with their game development. Not only did they release the second episode to Half-Life 2, they also went on to release 2 brand new titles under the collection game title The Orange Box. Within this you got the whole of Half-Life 2 along with the puzzle game Portal, which was pushing the technology again, giving you a gun that created portals allowing you to travel almost everywhere in the enclosed map. The game went on to be labelled as one of the most innovative games out there with hours of unique gameplay. The second game was Team Fortress 2, a follow-up to the original but with much more of a different take compared to the first. Team Fortress 2 had a brand new cartoon art style and really defined selectable characters, with really clear roles such as the super fast scout with a baseball bat and the heavy with his slow moving but extremely powerful machine gun. Both Portal and TF2 were massive hits, with TF2 becoming one of the biggest multiplayer games during those years. Also, thanks to its quirky style, it made for some of the best trailers Valve had seen. It also helped lead on to some of the biggest games out now, like Overwatch, Rainbow Six Siege, and other role-based FPS games. But it seemed like Valve weren't happy with just having Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, and Portal as recognizable games. Valve wanted another title, one that could help boost sales once again, and in 2008, Valve released their latest IP, which was developed by Turtle Rock Studios, titled Left 4 Dead. But this series saw a lot of controversies and may have been a low point for Valve, which my good friend and Left 4 Dead fan, Wow Such Gaming, will tell you about in this nice collaborative section of the video. Take it away, Wow.
In 2003, Turtle Rock Studios were looking to create a really immersive multiplayer game that encouraged teamwork and advanced AI systems. In 2004, Turtle Rock went on to help Valve develop the Xbox version of Counter-Strike, as well as the next installment of the series Counter-Strike Source and Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. After creating a mod for Counter-Strike, which was called Terror Strike, Turtle Rock wanted to create a game that was horror-themed and looked at a multiplayer game revolving around zombies after they had watched 28 Days Later. In 2005, Turtle Rock began the development of their latest game, which they titled Left 4 Dead. Valve fully supported this venture and funded them throughout the development process. In 2006, the game was finally announced and a trailer was hidden within the Orange Box in 2007. Left Left 4 Dead finally released on the 17th of November in 2008. The game was critically appraised and won over a ton of players. It introduced brand new, extremely intelligent AI mechanics, different variants of enemy types, a terrifying setting, and game modes that forced you to work as a team. This was certainly a great title to have for anyone wanting to play PvE style games with their mates. But just before its release, Valve secretly bought out Turtle Rock Studios and turned them into a sister studio called Valve South. Unfortunately, after Left 4 Dead was released, Valve South was closed down. Luckily, Turtle Rock made a revival and said they would continue to work with Valve on future releases. Soon after this announcement, Gabe Newell and Valve stated that there would be free updates for this game being wheeled out for the community. They wanted to put the players first and make sure that the game had a constant stream of player engagement. But exactly 1 year later, Valve went against everything they had previously done with games and went on to announce and release Left 4 Dead 2 on the 17th of November in 2009. While most people at E3 were excited to see more of Left 4 Dead, a lot of fans online started a campaign against the second installment, stating it was trying to segregate players from the first game and force them to buy the second game and to buy the latest edition, going against all their statements about free updates for the community. 10,000 people signed up on Steam in a boycott for the series, really trying to prove to Valve that they weren't to be misled by this title. This event certainly affected Valve in some ways, as they have never done anything like this since. But despite the boycott, Left 4 Dead 2 brought in some truly iconic characters, including Coach, some fantastic new types of enemies, some great melee weapons, and some brilliant maps, some in daylight this time, all whilst keeping that same look and feel of the first game, with that core focus on teamwork. So despite all the controversies held against Valve, which may have ruined their reputation, Left 4 Dead 2 still sold extremely well and honestly went on to inspire other games going forward. I mean, if it wasn't for Left 4 Dead 2, I wouldn't have my channel where it is today. Its player base is still in the tens of thousands years later, and is still regarded as one of the best multiplayer games of all time. So yeah, Left 4 Dead 2, despite everything, still became an iconic title for Valve, one that is totally recognizable by players everywhere. Long distance! Boom! Thanks for having me, WiseFish Gaming, and don't forget I have a video covering this subject as well if you want to go more in depth over the boycott that surrounded the Valve Left 4 Dead 2 announcement. Anyways, stay well guys, and thanks again for having me, WiseFish.
Thanks for that, Well. If you guys want to learn more about the full story of Left 4 Dead 2, as Well said, check out his video below. I'll link it in the description. But thank you for joining us, and it's been a pleasure. In 2010, Valve went on to release a new type of game, which was actually a remake of the Unreal Tournament 2004 mod Alien Swarm. Alien Swarm's original developers were hired again by Valve, and the game was eventually released as a free-to-play game on the 19th of July 2010. The game also released with mod tools to help players develop things within it. The game got an overall rating of 77 out of 100 on Metacritic, so it was a pretty good top-down shooter game, and was labelled as one of the best free-to-play games. In 2011, Valve began working on their latest release and sequel to 2008's Portal. Portal 2 was released on the 18th of April 2011, and this time had a much bigger focus on story, with Stephen Merchant voicing your new ally and enemy Wheatley. The game was a great hit and once again one of the best puzzle games out there, with new mechanics and some beautiful new looking graphics. The game also featured a brand new multiplayer mode which allowed players to play together as a team and solve puzzles together. It's still great to play, and it just helped Portal to become another flagship series for Valve, especially as there was no real sign of Half Life 3 being confirmed anytime soon. 1 year later, Valve went on to release their most popular version of Counter-Strike, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, also known as CSGO, which to this day is still being supported, has become free to play, and just rakes the players in all over the world. A year after that, Valve were once again given a massive boost by a group of modders who had come together to create a fantastic mod on Warcraft 3 titled Defense of the Ancients, also known as Dota. After this, the lead designer from the mod, IceFrog, was hired by Valve and asked to create the second version of Defense of the Ancients. Dota 2 was eventually released on the 9th of July 2013, 2013 and became the real competitor to League of Legends, which had won over the esports world, especially in Asia. Dota 2 was a hit, but it also helped push the esports world into a new direction. Dota 2's esports tournament became the first tournament to have a prize pool of $1 million, which of course brought in tons of new players. Since then, esports has seen a massive increase in sponsorship and has allowed players to make this a full career choice, with prize pools of up to $30 million in Dota's International. Unfortunately for Valve, however, it doesn't look like we would ever get a game like Dota 2 again because of Blizzard's choice of copyrighting any modded game within Warcraft 3 Reforged. So Valve have to thank their lucky stars that they were able to monetize this mod when they did, but because of it, it has meant Blizzard are far more scared of losing IPs thanks to modders. After Dota 2, Valve seemed to focus on building up their esports presence with Counter-Strike and Dota 2 and advancing their Steam software. During 2013 till 2016, Valve released a few titles such as Counter-Strike Online 2 and Left 4 Dead Survivors, but didn't focus their efforts on any big flagships such as Half Life 3, which people were still hungry for. In 2016, Valve started working on their presence within the VR world and created the free VR game which was to support the launch of HTC Vive's launch, which Valve collaborated with. The game was titled The Lab and was just a compilation of 8 minigames set within the same world of Portal. The game wasn't meant to push the boundaries in gaming, but it did allow Valve to experiment more in their technology and branch into the VR world. Soon after that, Valve announced that they were working on a new Dota related game. Fans were super excited for this title, and maybe, finally, Gabe had gotten over his number 3 fear. But unfortunately, during the release trailer, fans were heavily disappointed at the announcement of their new game. Artifact was not exactly what fans were looking for, and in fact put a lot of people off, especially as they were excited for a new Dota game. The game, however, was designed by Magic the Gathering's creator Richard Garfield, and it did branch out into the mobile gaming world. As you can expect, the game did do well and has a lot of downloads on app stores, with a lot of support coming from the Asian markets. So although it may not have been the game people wanted, it still did well for Valve's stock. Dota was once again the focus for Valve, I guess because of how popular it was in the esports scene, and Valve began working on a new type of game set within the Dota universe. In 2019, Valve released into early access Dota Underlords, a free-to-play auto battler which was based off the massively popular Dota 2 mod Dota Auto Chess, which became a massive crowd pleaser on Twitch and still is very popular. Once again, mods had helped Valve come up with their latest release and helped it to become a big hit on mobile devices, PC, Mac and Linux. Not long after that release, Valve surprised everyone, stating that there were going to be a brand new, fully licensed Half-Life game. Most people assumed it was going to be Half-Life 3, but sadly were a bit disappointed when it was a spin-off titled Half Life Alyx. Regardless, the gameplay reveal went down extremely well with fans, showing off a massive upgrade in graphics with the G-Man looking cool as anything. This was also to be Valve's first ever big, fully fledged VR game to come under their name, a chance for them to once again play around and raise the bar for technology and hopefully bring more people into the VR world, especially with it being made under their new Source 2 engine. Alongside this, Valve also announced their latest VR hardware, the Valve Index, which was to be the next gen in technology for VR software, with new refresh rates, better screens, and new ways of interacting with things on screen with your controllers. Half-Life Alyx was once again proof that Valve were trying to play around with new technology, and whether it pays off we will have to see. But is it a surprise they are wanting to make Half-Life Alyx a VR only game? For me, it's no surprise at all, as they have always wanted to push the boundaries in technology. This is just the next step for them, and we will just have to see how it all works. And there we go, that is the history of Valve up until March 2020. Let me know what you think their biggest highlight has been and what your favourite game of theirs is in the comments below. Also, let me know if you're excited for Half-Life Alyx's release, and check out my thoughts on it in the video below, which should be in the description or by the side, hopefully by the side, but depends on the algorithm. Big thanks to WiseFish Gaming for helping me out with the Left 4 Dead section within this video. He really did a great video on the controversial launch of Left 4 Dead 2, so make sure you check that out. I really appreciate him joining me for this, and make sure you check out his channel if you haven't already. But that's it for now. Thanks again for watching, guys, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.